Rebecca, welcome to the Fiduciary U Podcast. Thank you for being a guest. I can't wait to chat with you.
Josh, appreciate it.
Pretty much everybody knows you in the industry, but if there's somebody who happens to be listening that doesn't, maybe just give a brief little background. Who you are, how you got started. As we were chatting just before this started, you had said that your firm is 10 years old, which is awesome. But maybe take a couple of minutes and just give listeners kind of background about how you got to where you are.
Absolutely. Kind of amazing to think 10 years ago. Just goes by so fast. I know that's the cliche, but when it happens, you go, "Oh, what happened?"
When you can count by decades, like you kind of hit a next level.
Yeah. So let's see. I'll kind of start from one of my way back in my youth days. I worked at Fidelity Investments in the research and analysis team. A lot of folks don't actually know that part. And that's kind of where I began cutting my teeth in more or less the DC space. And then after that, I joined a financial advisor firm where my mentor was a plan advisor. And I was, the fresh age of, I think I was 21. And he turns to me and he's like, "Hey, kid, here's a list of Excel spreadsheets of plan sponsors, 401k plans. Give them a call and see if you can draw them some meetings." Hey, you're 21. You don't have a lot going on. So I was sitting at it was actually a mahogany desk. So I'm sitting at this mahogany desk and I have the old-fashioned phone. I'm typing them in. And very embarrassingly, and I'll share this story because it's a true story, I ended up calling a TPA. And the TPA was like, "Oh my goodness, it's crazy busy. It's it's the July time frame, and I'm working on tax filings. You know what those are, right?" And he said the name of the form, and I was like, "Yes, form 5,500."
Way to play that off. Way to play it off.
5,500. If anyone's curious on how you pronounce it. And so we had a laugh, and that kind of continued on where I learned a ton. I went to meetings, I met with TPAs, I met with business owners, I did education for different employees, and I really enjoyed it. Well, also, anyone who's a financial advisor, you know this, when you're 21, it's very hard to find people who actually can help you live a lifestyle. And I mean a lifestyle of like ramen. So I joined Guardian Retirement Services. They had just started their new internal sales desk, and then I helped with that team grow. There was 3 of us when we started to about 30 when I eventually left. LPL Financial recruited me from my team in Boston to be in San Diego, which is where we are today. And then when I was at LPL, I was the East Coast relationship manager for institutional business, so retirement plan advisors, and that's where the conversation started to shift. We talked about practice management, business development campaigns, and then all the regular stuff that we talk about in our industry, like benchmarking, record keeper analysis, investment lineups, RFP responses, pitch decks. And then one fated day, I was talking with one of my favorite 401k advisors, and I asked him, I go, "What do you do for marketing?" And he's like, "I don't know, nothing. Like, we don't really have a thing." He's like, "We kind of take wealth management content and try and soften the edges and pass it along." And I said, "What would you like to do for marketing?" And then that led to a whole bunch of conversations, discoveries, talking with fellow advisors, and then building the blueprint 10 years ago now that would then become 401k marketing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And how have you seen things change in a decade? Like, do you feel like most advisors are kind of still stuck from a marketing standpoint where they were a decade ago, or how have you seen it kind of evolve over the years?
I love this question. I actually just wrote an article about this, kind of that thinking back and thinking ahead. So what was prevalent 10 years ago? What is current today? And then where are we going in the future, as well as demographics change, business owner needs adjust, and the advisor community starts to embrace technology more. So the first thing was 10 years ago. If you just kind of pause for a second, think about, what did your website look like 10 years ago? I mean, I think everyone would probably like laugh or smile and be like, "Oh, wow." It had tiny little boxes. It had, didn't even have tabs along the top of it. There's just all these visual aspects. Like, did you even have a website?
Advisor websites back in the day were garbage. They were so bad. I remember like that was one of the things when we launched Greenspring, and we kind of had an evolution over the years. But I'm like, a lot of times a website is more of like from a due diligence perspective for like when people are coming, we may not be converting them over, but maybe they got referred to us. Maybe they found out they're going to go first place and just kind of look what our presence looks like.
Sure.
And I was always like, a lot of these websites, like, it's like mail order. Like people would be totally turned off. And so that presence, obviously it's gotten better, but back in the day, it was total garbage. It was like, I was embarrassed for our industry, but it's changed a lot.
Oh my gosh, so much so in the last 10 years. A lot of advisors 10 years ago didn't even have a website. We had to convince them, like, a website's important.
And now they did. They probably had these janky calculators that were on there. Like, I still see them sometimes, but it's like, it's like these little calculators. I'm like, that is totally like, you gotta jump forward. You gotta hire Rebecca because that's funny. Like old school.
LinkedIn profiles weren't really a thing back then either. LinkedIn itself, which has, by the way, been around for 21 years now. But LinkedIn 10 years ago, people were like, I don't really know, social media, not sure if it's going to catch on, look, kind of a fad. And now you couldn't imagine, not having a LinkedIn profile, especially if you're in a sales capacity. So if you're meeting with plan sponsors, meeting with employees, your face is part of the organization. You have to have a robust looking LinkedIn profile because nearly 90% of people are going to click on you. Like, who are you? What's your background? What's your experience? Like, tell me the types of information without telling me, based on your newsfeed. What do you read? What are you going to be educating me on? How are you making me a better fiduciary, better retirement saver?
Actually, that was the team page for us was always when we looked at like Google Analytics. The team page was like one of the very top, like number 2 in a lot of cases. Like obviously people would hit our landing page, but people would go and look at the team. And so, it was interesting, like thinking about that, if that's where people are going to go, like how do we do things, whether it's our bio or professional headshots or, if that's where people are going to kind of check you out, like people, I really am convinced people make decisions in the first 5 minutes, whether or not they can envision themselves working with you. And then they use the remaining time to validate either I am going to work with this person or I'm not. So they talk about first impressions, but that is, that is still, I think, very key naturally with people psychologically is what's my first impression? And then I'll use, whatever I come to, believe, I'm going to spend the rest of my time validating one way or the other to support my decision that I've already made.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And nowadays with our phones always being like right here, where's my phone? Oh, it's charging. Your phone's being like right here, and you say a person's name, like what? It's just instinctive. You just start. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, this is a person. Okay, and then that's your first impression, visual identity. And if you have a banner image, by the way, on LinkedIn, which the majority of folks nowadays do, there's still some that are holdouts. That increases the algorithm that you are the correct person that people are looking for from LinkedIn's back end. It also starts to enhance that initial reaction of, oh, I am looking at the right individual. Maybe it has your company's name or something that's an easy visual signifier, like, yes, this is correct. And it also adds a little bit more professional personality. So whether you can go like on the corporate side, or if you do want to show something that is kind of like an appropriate like hobby or interest of yours that people recognize and know with you. For example, here in Southern California, we have some great friends who are amazing surfers. They are in our industry and their background is professionally done, like picture of surfing, but it also has like their tagline, their company logo, and it's done in a way that's like, oh, this is really cool. Like this person's a great surfer and they're a professional. They're right. Do you remember what your LinkedIn profile looked like in the beginning? Like your first time you guys did headshots together? Because it's awkward, right? The first time you do headshots, it's like, that's why I like laughing. Do you remember the first time you did that?
I remember the first time we did headshots. It was very early on, and there were only a couple of us. There were only actually two of us when we first kind of started. So, but no, I can't remember what my LinkedIn profile looked like when it first started. I have no idea. It feels like it's been around 21 years, and I was a pretty early adopter on LinkedIn. I didn't utilize it probably that effectively for a while, but I remember having one very, very early, and it was after I had left like Morgan Stanley, because I kind of feel like when I was at Morgan Stanley, like they wouldn't even let you have a LinkedIn profile. I think when I was there,
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that, paper, the physical aspect of paper, is not as, it depends on which demographic you're working with, but it's not necessarily as common as it used to be. A lot of times advisors would always want to have printed materials. So we did a lot of brochures, a lot of overviews, actually things that you could write on. Now, from a content perspective, we're doing a lot of things that are still in a PDF style, but it's digital. So it's a digital deliverable and no longer a paper deliverable.
Right.
Interestingly, baby boomers still like paper. Gen Xers are kind of that middle zone. Some like paper, some prefer digital, but you want to have both options. Millennials are more digital, and then Gen Zers are obviously digital as well.
So here's a question for you. One of the biggest challenges as an advisor, and especially in the retirement industry, is it's really hard to differentiate. Everybody kind of uses the same tools. They use kind of the same playbooks. And I really feel like differentiation is like the key to survival. Like when you can't differentiate, like you become a commodity, and and commodities deal with commodity pricing. And it's just interesting, like your thoughts in terms of like, is it that, Gen Z prefers digital because that's how they like, could you differentiate if you did something like paper-based with them? Like, would they totally be like, no, I don't like this? Or do you think they'd be like, oh, wow, that's actually different? Like, one of my philosophies is you don't have to be better. I mean, hopefully you are. You don't have to be better. You just have to be different. Like,
Well, you have 4 Gen Z kids, so you could always do like a beta
case
test case study at the house. Like, hey, kid. And I know how Gen Z likes to use the word throwback. So it could be like a throwback to the old days, the paper days.
Oh, I'm going to go home tonight with paper, clean your room. And I'm suspecting it's not going to work, but I'm going to try. I think I may try it.
I think that is a wonderful example.
Right. Okay.
Good or bad. They're going to remember that.
I'll report that.
Yeah, please do.
So you definitely see the identity with like the kind of the delivery of content. It sounds like has changed from what it used to be, and I think that's partly probably infused by or accentuated by COVID as well. A lot of the advisors I talk to are like, we don't do a ton of like in-person meetings anymore. It's through COVID, it's more digital. So, the idea of like printing things out, there's not really a need because, we may only be meeting once a year. The client we meet with 4 times a year, we're going to do 3 virtual and we're only going to meet once a year.
Yeah.
Have you seen the content and the messaging and the narratives change over the past decade?
It used to be a lot more as we are a fiduciary advisor. So 10 years ago, so I have 20 years now collectively, more or less, in the RP space. And when I started, it was everyone can do retirement plans. Everyone. Right. Come one, come all. It's the welcome land. Right. You're a new kid. Call these form 5,500 and, that's right. And set up some new appointments. Well, then after, let's say 2008, more or less, we started to go into that siloed effect. You have to be kind of anointed to sell or to service, so advise retirement plans in a 321 or 338 capacity. So there started to become that clear delineation. Broker of record, 321, 338. And then home offices, rightfully so for risk management perspectives, they started to say, yes, you can do this business, or no, you can't, based on your experience. So we started to have these silos that went into effect. And now, with the convergence of health and wealth, we're starting to go back to where we were, throwback, so to speak. We're now everyone like, come one, come all, and join the exciting world of retirement plans. And I think a lot of that's from the state IRA state mandated plans, so small plans coming back up, PEPs also being another option for people. You mentioned commoditization in our business. So if everyone is using similar services or similar 338 investment monitoring options, how is that a differentiator any longer? And I think back 10 years ago, if you're a fiduciary advisor, like, whoa, like that's amazing. Like put it on your website, like put it on all your content, put it in a banner out front in the yard, in front of your office. And
we rode that. I rode that wave for a long time. Like that was a differentiator. And then, it's interesting. Competitive advantages always get competed away. Like if they work, they get competed away. And that's why I think, having to stay kind of ahead of the curve. Because, and I used to say this, like being a fiduciary is not a differentiator. Being a 321, being a 330, that's not a differentiator. It really comes down to, because anybody can be. I mean, assuming you're with a firm or you have your own firm, like that is a contractual relationship. Like that is not hard. The real question becomes like, what is it about you, your expertise, your skills, your insights, your capabilities, your resources that enable you to be the best or the right fiduciary for us to hire for our plan? What makes you different, unique? How are you going to get better outcomes than everybody else who says and can do the exact same things as you can do? How would you talk to an advisor who is stuck in that place of like, how do I differentiate? Like everybody's saying the same thing. Like, what do I do? Like, how do I separate from the pack?
Sure. I always found this question interesting because everyone always wants to know, like, what's the silver bullet? What's the silver bullet to success?
There is none.
That's years of experience talking there. There is none. But I will say the first differentiator is visual. So how do you look different? And I think that is one of the most important cornerstones that a lot of times gets lost. So if you look different than the rest of the proverbial advisors out there, you're going to, when people are screening or doing digital due diligence on advisors, and they go to your website and it looks amazing. They're like, oh, this is different. When they go to your LinkedIn profile, when they check out your blog articles, some advisors are starting to use Instagram as a way to increase SEO as well as additional exposure. It's more on the participant side, but it's happening.
Yeah.
So when people start to look you up, it's not the same like blue. It's something different. And it can be blue. Blue is actually a wonderful color. It's the color of trust in the psychology of color. There's nothing wrong with that one. But I think everyone kind of understands, like, if you have the same website or a website you've had for 5 years, you might want to reconsider, like, what are you doing website-wise? Like, what does the imagery look like? Last year, one of the main topics, and I know it's still a very important topic, was around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you look at your website and like, what are the people? How are you representing our diverse culture in today's day and age? There's a really cool stat in the 2020 census where 48% of the newest generation, Gen Alpha, do not have a check the box identity. 48%. So I love that. As a mom who has a 2-year-old, I love that. So thinking ahead when you're looking at your website, take a look at your stock photography. There's a lot of stock photography that's wonderful, and there's a lot of stock photography that might not be hitting exactly what you're trying to achieve. And keep in mind who are the decision makers within the companies that you service, and then what do those employees look like.
Do you think even people should use a lot of stock photography, or do you think it as you're trying to kind of communicate personality, is it better to invest in, kind of professional photographers to come in and maybe like with your team, kind of like an in action, so that the imagery is actually the people that they're going to be working with?
That's my favorite. We have helped lots of our clients. We actually pull stock photography. So we work to create brand guidelines. Brand guidelines is a way of putting together kind of like an IPS for your brand. So it's your correct logo, how it can be used, the correct color schemes. If you have different sectors in your business, you want any of those colors to be associated with that type of business. For example, like wealth management, retirement plans. We do other services as well around that. So like 529 plans, education, financial planning, pick the service that you want. And then you associate a color with it. How those colors can be shown. So how are you using text on colors, white font versus black font versus a variation of colorful fonts. Right now too, I'll mention, because everything is digital, you really want to pay attention to the contrast ratios of your colors. So that way when you have, let's say, a yellow color and I'm just going to use wild examples here, an orange color, you wouldn't put them together because then you couldn't read what you're going for. But if you have, let's say, a yellow and then you have black, you can read that. So you want to take a look at from a usability standpoint.
Do you want in many cases, do you want kind of maybe your primary and maybe accent colors to actually, I know they have like color wheels and stuff like that, but kind of be farther apart as opposed to closer together to kind of create that starker contrast?
Yeah, we're seeing that. Yes, exactly. And I think a lot of times when folks picked their colors back in the day, they just picked 3 colors because they liked 3 colors. Now it's a much more thoughtful process of like, what's the psychology of the colors behind it? What feelings and emotions are we trying to convey to the people who are looking at our content? So to answer your question, by the way, yes, I love it when people will hire a professional photographer, have their team front and center showcase what it's like to actually sit down with your office. Like, this is our real office. So if you come visit us, you can come in and hang out and we can talk. So what does that look like when you go to someone's website and you see like a building or their conference room or them having a conversation? That puts that person literally in the room and then already starts to move them forward towards, yes, I would like to have this conversation with you in reality.
What I think is now what you're starting to talk about, and this is, advisors are really good with providing information and bits and bytes of data and whatnot. And sometimes I think they lean on that as a crutch as opposed to, you really need to start thinking about an engineering and kind of like work backwards from like, what do we want the experience to feel like? And the greatest example, and it kind of highlights what you just said. I remember the house we live in now, like I had no intention of buying a new house. In fact, the house I live in now is about 800 yards as the crow flies from the house I lived in before.
What happened?
Is a very expensive 800 yards in that difference. Well, I'll tell you what happened is we knew from a realtor, and we had a friend who was a realtor, and we had told the friend, like, at some point we were thinking about like doing a bunch of work to our house, and then we were probably going to overbuild for the neighborhood we were in, and had just mentioned to a realtor, like, we if you see anything interesting come on the market, let us know.
Simple ask, real simple.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the best laid plans of mice and men, right? So there's a point to this story. The point is that there was a house that hadn't hit the market yet that our realtor knew about. And mentioned to my wife, you guys should just go check it out. And my wife's like, why don't we just go look? It'll be fun. Like, we're not going to buy it, but let's go look. And I'm like, okay. And we pull in and I'm like, okay, this is not starting off well. We walk in and I knew I was in trouble about 3 minutes in when my wife started saying, at Christmas, this is where the tree could be. Mm-hmm. And then at Thanksgiving. And I knew I was a goner because she was already envisioning our life in that house. And lo and behold, like that's where I live in this house now. And I think thinking about that though, from like a client, and I love what you said is like even showcasing like your office, the conference room, when people come in, if you have a nice front lot, like so that people can envision themselves when they go in, you're like kind of like front loading the experience so that they walk in when it kind of matches up, it feels familiar. And that's a powerful kind of elixir that can connect people. You still got to do a good job when you meet with them and create connection and empathy and trust and relationship. But there's a way to like prime them for when they do come in, I think. Would you agree with that?
Totally agree. And I'd also say that with the proliferation of the internet, that a significant percentage of the sales process is actually done before you ever physically meet. And to that exact point of if your website shows your office, we already know that nearly 90% of folks are going to look you up before saying yes to a meeting. Okay, well, what are they finding? Finding your profile. If they're a digital sleuth, they might click over and see, like, do you have a Facebook profile? You know, what do you like in real life? Like, how fun are you? They're going to check out your website. When they're on their website, if you have like you said, like, welcome to our office, like experience, now they're already, 5, 10, 15% into the sales process. Mm-hmm. They've met you, right? They've heard about you. That's actually step one. And that goes behind the scenes more to the biz dev campaigns around like, what are you doing for email marketing? What are you doing for SEO? What are you doing for different things on social media to generate awareness and buzz? Then they come to your website to learn more. They go to that LinkedIn profile. They see what your office looks like. So, how many percentage points do you think are you into that sales process? And I think a lot of folks, when they're thinking about like traditional ways of, I shook the client's hand. 10 weeks later, we met again. 14 months later, which is the average sales cycle for the retirement plan business, we signed contract paperwork. Like, no, it actually starts way before then. And that's all part of that initial client experience.
What are some of the things that you're seeing out and that you're doing with like your clients? If you look at the firms that are really achieving, success versus ones who maybe are kind of stuck in neutral a little bit. What do you see, or maybe none of your clients are stuck in neutral, a firm that maybe comes to you and feels stuck in neutral, sure, and you've been able to kind of like kickstart them. Yeah. Like, what are you seeing them do from a kind of overall marketing perspective?
Sure. I mentioned this already, but a lot of times it just starts with taking a look at the website. There's a lot of things behind the scenes of websites that you also just want to say, okay, let's tweak this. Let's figure out how from an SEO perspective we can get you higher up for Google results, other search engine results as well. Visually, what does it feel like? Is this good? Can we make changes? Do we need to scrap it all together? And it's usually somewhere in between. How are your brand standards? Do you have defined brand guidelines? Most of the folks who join us, they have gone through the exercise, but then those documents kind of lived in a file folder. They never really kind of came back out. So we make sure that those are through and through.
It's like the 100-page financial plan that somebody goes through and then they put it on the shelf and they never implemented anything.
Yeah, that's what it is. Right. So then it's what are you doing for email marketing campaigns? Most advisors, you have 500 contacts just like that. Your existing clients, your centers of influence, prospects that you've been dripping on or met with over the last 2 to 3 years. You'd be amazed. It's 500. Just that's an amazing beginning list. I'd say that the number one thing a lot of advisors struggle with, how are you continuing to fill that email pipeline? So, you use it for, 6 months, a year. How are you filling it back up? People unsubscribe, folks retire, they leave that organization, they change jobs. You always have to make sure that you are constantly kind of pouring water back into the top of the funnel through your email list. Same thing on LinkedIn. How are you making new connections on a regular basis? I've talked a tiny bit about the LinkedIn algorithm. The LinkedIn algorithm wants you to be making 4 new connections per week. That demonstrates that you're on their platform, you're kind of abiding by their rules and what they're interested in. It is, at the end of the day, a networking platform, so they want you to continue to grow your network. So how are you doing that? A lot of folks kind of log in and then silent scroll. So they can scroll through it, but they don't actually do any sort of engagement. Engagement, by the way, is just a like. They just like stuff every once in a while, and that counts. So that's another thing, is making sure that from a social perspective, you are active on it. And then your blog. Blogs are, if you have a blog on your website, people will stay on your website 3 times longer. Also, from a web page optics, so the first page everyone goes to is your homepage, the second page is your About Us, and your third one is your blog. So if you have an active blog, people are going to take the time to scroll through it. They're going to read the headline images. They might click into an article here or there to find more information. But in your blog, what you're doing is you're telling that person, hey, these are the types of things I'm an expert in, and I'm going to share my great knowledge with you. So if you're a plan sponsor, and you're looking for tax liability reductions, there's an article on it. If you're the director of HR and you really care about financial wellness ideas and how do you talk about student loan forgiveness and college savings and there's an article about this. If you're the CEO who knows that recruiting, retention, rewarding is so important, especially amongst your pre-retirees or near retirees, you want to make sure you continue that culture, and it's not just an up or out, but actually a rewarding culture. Oh, look, there's an article about that. And that's where you're soft pitching those prospects, those clients, that this is my level of expertise that I'm going to constantly be sharing with you.
And what do you think the most effective way when you were, and it's interesting kind of blog, and you see so many people now going to kind of video and whatnot and video engagement. And my kind of philosophy is figure out what works for you. If you really love to write, you're very gifted at it, lean into that, do that.
Yeah.
If you're really good on video, do video.
Sure.
If you're a good speaker, figure out a way to speak more often, kind of lean into your strengths. But thinking about content, and as people are looking, what would you what were a few tips you would have in terms of how should you structure that content? Should it be, lots of long prose? Should it be really focused around kind of, calls to action? How do you think about designing your content strategy to be as most effective to your audience as possible?
Great. If you want to get fit, just hypothetically speaking, how many times do you have to go to the gym?
3 to 4 times a week.
Love it. Okay. So same thing, consistency. So pick whatever medium you like. If you like to do podcasts, this is a video podcast. If you like to do them, keep doing them. Make it into a regular cadence. If you like to write, then put that into a regular system as well. That's the most important aspect of it. And it's, making sure you're constantly sharing information. There's so many times that we've clicked on different blog sections or resource sections or insight sections, and there's one post. It's welcome to our blog.
Right.
We're okay, cool. That was 2022. What are we doing now? So, and the other thing I'll add is with the proliferation of AI, everyone kind of thinks like, oh, this is easy. I'll just like click a button and then boom, I'll have like an automatic presentation. There's all these new PowerPoint things out there. Or I'll have an immediate article, or I'll have a cool image like the AI generated and it took me 0.5 seconds to do. I'll challenge that. You still need humans to like read it, edit it, modify it, get it compliance approved, understand your concept, who you're talking to, what they care about. And it's not just like a one-click solution. AI is awesome. And if you haven't experimented, I highly encourage everyone to.
It is awesome, but you know what? It's like anything. And this is, I talk to a lot of advisors, like you could take the same tools and put them in the hands of advisors and get very different outcomes. It really comes down to the skill and the ability of the advisor. Like you can have an advisor that's not that skilled, that has the best tools in the world, and can't do a whole lot with them. You could have an advisor that is super skilled and you give them very rudimentary tools and they're going to achieve a really good outcome. And, I would even say there is no doubt when you look at, I wound up getting, I use Microsoft 365 and I was like, you know what, I'm going to sign up for Copilot. And I will say, like, it's powerful, but it really comes down to like, who's the best at creating the right prompts? Like if you can prompt it really well,
sure,
you can get, that's what I would say is like, if you're going to use AI, and I would tell any listener, like it's, you don't rely on it entirely, but if you use it as a tool, but like it really comes down to like, if you can really develop an ability to prompt it in the right ways, like you can get some really, really good stuff from it. So
yeah, I look forward to what the future looks like in AI too. I mean, we're just at like, not even a teaspoon yet. Drop of sand really in the AI bucket. But in 5 years from now, we'll be having a super different conversation about how we have robots standing next to us now.
Right. Well, I think that's important for advisors to think about, even if you're looking at your own practice. And I might offend some people from this, but like investment selection and due diligence hasn't been a differentiator in years. I mean, that's the most commoditized part of what an advisor does. Most advisors would say like the investment piece, it's 10% of what I do. There's a lot more that I do. And I do think as advisors start to think about the things that you do now, if those can be automated, like don't stake your value prop on that. You have to start thinking about like, it's not, I don't think AI for certain things it's going to be AI, but I don't think it's necessarily like a binary either or. I think it's both and end. It's kind of like using AI, but still kind of human enabled, but thinking as an advisor, like what are the things in my value prop that can't be kind of automated and how do I use AI to enhance the work we do for clients that can be automated and more commoditized. And then the other things like where can I, what's kind of my secret sauce is a good thing for things to advisors take a really hard look at.
There's a really great book by Dan Sullivan called Who, Not How. And it's all about restructuring like your mental frame of mind on who has the best time, talent, capabilities to accomplish this. And it might cost money to hire that person or that technology stack or that program, whatever it may be. But if you can get that back in your time, talent, and resources by maximizing your own time, then it is worth the cost 100% or more of the time.
It's an investment, not an expense in that case.
Yeah. Yep. We've always referred to marketing as it's a newer shift. We've always referred to marketing as an investment at my firm. We've always referred to it as an investment, never a spend. And then second, about 2 years ago, we started shifting from the word marketing to the words business development campaigns. Because marketing, I'm not sure why, but I think it's such a broad topic. So if you ask someone and you ask them kind of candidly, like, hey, what is marketing? What's the definition of marketing to you? A lot of times what we hear was like, oh, it's like color, it's like layout, it's like text, it's like imagery. And
that's design. That's not really, if that's design, that's not marketing.
Exactly. And so we started to shift and say, well, what do you think business development campaigns are? And then advisors, people we talked to, and started saying, oh, business development campaigns, like that's email outreach, lead generation, lead nurturing, capture forms, websites, click funnels, moving people along through the pipeline, prospecting, pitch deck proposals, finalists, RFP responses. And we're like, yeah, yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
That's probably all the things you would have described as marketing, but they described as business development campaigns. And so, now starting to align and speak with the language that, your customer or your client or your end user, the way they think about it. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question because as a former 401k practitioner, you know this firsthand. You rewind the clock here when you started with Greenspring and you looked inside the tech stack that you had at that point in time. And this is something that I think we'll have a nice back and forth because it's something I feel as well. I feel like it was very much like you used this for, investment due diligence, you used this for benchmarking, you used this for sales and marketing, you used this for CRM and client management. It was all kind of fractional across the board. Nothing was like integrated. So when you started your firm, how did you kind of put all those pieces together so when the advisor was looking at their business, they were able to do it with greater clarity?
Oh, that's good. Man, you turned the tables on me. Nobody's ever turned the tables on me on the Fiduciary U podcast. So I have a couple of thoughts on this. And I would still say in many ways, and now working with lots of advisors, is that retirement advisors are still pretty stuck 10 years ago in a lot of the tech stack that they use. And that's partly an advisor issue. That's partly, I think, just an industry issue. You probably have heard of Michael Kitces, authority and kind of the wealth side. And he does this great thing called the Advisor, Tech Map Directory. Right, you're on it. I'm on it as well. And if you go on it, it's overwhelming. There's like hundreds of tools that are on there. But if you look, 98% of those tools are all wealth focused.
Yeah.
And part of that is just, if you trace back kind of the history, is you look at the growth. And again, at Greenspring, we rode this wave. You had custodians like Fidelity and Schwab and TD back in the day that really, in 2004, when we started Greenspring, these kind of upstart custodians, it was the early days, but they are what really enabled kind of the independent RIA market to coalesce and to grow, because you didn't any longer have to be at a big wirehouse or a big broker dealer. You now have your own firm. You had this independent custodian. And because Fidelity and Schwab and TD, and there were a few others back then, but their core customer was the independent RIA. And what they did around custody data is that they opened up the data. And we used very early on, there weren't many tools. There were only a couple of portfolio management platforms on the wealth side. We used something called Schwab Portfolio Center. And it was like, you're talking like it was like stuck in the 90s. But my point there is, because the goal of these custodians was really to serve RIAs and help RIAs compete and grow, they opened up their data pipes. And what that allowed was all that data allowed fintech companies to come in and take that data and start to build these really, really cool tools. The challenge in the retirement industry is different, because in some cases, those same companies, instead of having a small number of custodians whose kind of core business is to serve the RIA. You've now got a ton of different record keepers. I know we've had consolidation, but you still have lots of record keepers. And those record keepers are very protective of their data, or the plan sponsor's data. And they haven't been willing. And if you had 15 or 20, like, how do we aggregate? And there's some tools out there now. There were some early ones. If you look at like RPAG does it, FI360 does it, InvestNet, right? They all do data aggregation. But I will tell you, like, it sounds great, but a lot of the data aggregation that they're doing out of 401k plans, like, it's still very hit or miss. And there's a lot of QA you got to go in to make sure data is accurate. And that has kept it from being, like, there hasn't been the pace of innovation and proliferation in retirement plan advisor technology, in my opinion. There's still, like, a lot of people are still using kind of the usual suspects. That's partly why I got into this, is I was like, you know what? I think there's an opportunity to create some more kind of modern technology. So what we tried to do, and it was very piecemeal, like, integration is great if you can get everything to work, and every advisor wants one thing that they could use that rules them all. That doesn't exist. What I would argue is that advisors need to be very thoughtful around the tools that they use. And if they can get them to integrate in certain ways, great. But sometimes advisors let perfection be the enemy of good. Like, it's like, oh, we just want one system. We don't want multiple systems. Well, in some cases, if you use multiple systems, but you use them well, or multiple platforms, and figure out, like, you can actually be more, you can be more efficient. I do think the challenge we've seen in the industry, and we are looking to solve for this, is a lot of the tech that's out there. Like, you may be able to kind of white label, and this goes back to the differentiation. Like, everybody has the same tool set. And so if you're going in and you're showing the same information in the same format to your prospects and clients, you're not able to differentiate. You're kind of stuck. Maybe you can white label, and a lot of these tools let you white label. But white label is like, you can throw your logo and your color scheme up. Now, I would argue like that like, advisors need technology platforms where they can take their own kind of IP and thinking and differentiation and process and philosophy, in my opinion. And they need technology platforms they can kind of use as a chassis or an engine and drop what makes them unique or makes them different, and leverage technology platforms that allow them then to kind of incorporate their own intellectual property. Like, that's what we're trying to solve for. And I think that's the real key. I don't know if I totally answered your question. It's hard. You still are not going to get, we used FI360. We had a platform that now is Fiduciary X, that the first generation that I built. We created online fiduciary training. We used another platform for that. We had Salesforce. Salesforce was good for certain things, but required a lot of customization. We still did a lot of PowerPoint and Excel and spreadsheets, and advisors in the retirement industry still do a lot of that. And so I still feel like, as a retirement industry, a lot of the tools we have still feels like it's 2012 in a lot of ways, not 2024, 2014. It feels 10 years ago. And it's a challenge. It still is a challenge. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of my perspective on it.
This is a random question and still kind of baking in my mind. So in the RP space, we have, call it 7,000 advisors who are focused on retirement plans, which very much in the 300,000 licensed professionals and kind of financial services at large, makes us kind of a cottage industry, very specialized, very niche, very specific. However, our influence, you could call it, is, I think it was like $25 trillion is our influence between DC and IRAs. That's not a small number. That's a giant number. So my point is, I wonder if, when we're thinking about tools and functionality within the advisor's business, is it because we haven't had enough capital put into it, or?
Yeah, that is a big, and I think a couple of reasons. You nailed one, right? the TAM, the total addressable market, it's low. It's, 7,000 like is probably generous in terms of like the really,
Sure.
and
Specialist.
so, if you're looking and you're saying there's 300,000 financial advisors and 7,000 are really kind of like serious about 401k,
Yeah.
what is that? 2%, a little more than 2%. So like the total addressable market. And if you're raising capital, the other thing is that, and you always hear retirement plan advisors like practices are less profitable than wealth. And that is true, but it's true in part because advisors in the retirement plan side don't leverage. They don't have access to as good of tools in a lot of cases, but they also don't leverage those tools well. They're very conditioned to like, I'm going to do things manually. And so they don't have capacity. They don't have margin kind of within their business. And part of the profitability is most retirement plan advisors think that how they solve growth challenges is with personnel solutions. And that's expensive. It's time consuming. And so, and I know this is a big thing for you, and I want you to touch on this, is like thinking about, business development campaigns, marketing. I know that, but as kind of like part of your tech stack.
Yeah.
The other thing is like advisors, like they feel a lot of pressure. They do a lot of things manual and not systematically. And from a repeat standpoint, they don't do a good job, in my opinion. And I love you all listening, but in a lot of cases, like you spend too much time doing things that require a lot of effort and have very low perceived value from your clients. The real secret is how do you create content, tools, deliverables, resources, insights, whatever, that have high perceived value with low required effort. Like if you want to build a kick-A practice, you need to spend as much time as possible in that high value, low effort. And that requires a change in behavior. That requires a better use of technology and implementation. That requires implementing, in my opinion, kind of standards on your team in terms of how they're gonna operate. And I think it requires, like, in a lot of cases, advisors sell information. What clients want are insights. And I think that's where you drop in, is, being able to take, it's still very much who kind of controls the metaphor and the story. Instead of just giving information, plan sponsors, a lot of times you give them information and you expect them to be able to kind of like connect the dots. And they don't know how to do it because they don't spend. And in a lot of cases, they'll misinterpret what you give them. And so
businesses. They're not.
That's exactly right.
Not reading our.
That's right. And so I do.
Publications.
I do think like a lot of the content like you create is awesome. It's not enough, in my opinion, just to deliver it. Like give it to people and say, here you go. In my opinion, you need to take that and now you need to build a story around it. He or she who controls the metaphor controls the conversation, plain and simple. And I would say a lot of that kind of like getting lift is, you know what, like let's partner with a really good content partner, but then let's figure out like how we're gonna message this, how are we gonna take that and provide kind of the executive summary unique to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Many years ago, my dad actually taught me this, which is a little quick math, but if you take your hourly rate, so whatever you bill per hour, just hypothetically speaking, most advisors don't bill per hour, but if you put a number in your head and you multiply it by 2, so it's just for today's conversation, I'll do $50 an hour times 2 is $100, and then you add 3 zeros at the end of it.
You make way more than $50 an hour. You're lowballing it.
Well,
we'll go with your $50. Okay.
And that would be $100,000 a year. So if you think of your business and you say, okay, what do we want to earn per year as a business? Do the same math. So, probably add some more zeros on there. But if we take $100,000 $1,000 and it's $50 an hour, just to get the same math equation.
Yep.
And if you were to create your own Fiduciary RX, if you were to create your own benchmarking spreadsheet, if you were to create your own business development campaigns, how much time would that take? Right. So let's just say, because we're talking about benchmarking on an Excel spreadsheet, that takes you call the record keepers, you get their proposals, you comb through proposals. If you're doing it again, the old-fashioned way, you comb through the proposals, you stick it on your Excel spreadsheet, you probably add some color for pizzazz, and then
you copy it and you paste it into your PowerPoint template that you're actually going to deliver. Yep, I'm with you.
So we're at, 4 hours, 6 hours? And then also keep in mind, how much time is that taking your team? Are you the one who's physically talking to the internal to run the proposal? Are you sending an email? Again, we're kind of talking the old-fashioned way here, but so let's just ballpark 6 hours. So 6 hours at $50 an hour is
$300.
$300, right?
You double that at $600.
Yeah, and if you think, okay, how much would subscribing to a tool that can automate this for me? And I always think of it as well as frustration. How much is frustration worth?
Yeah.
You know that feeling where you're like, oh, yeah. How much does that actually cost you? And it kind of derails so much of your good momentum. So now
the other element to that isn't factored in is now, what is your opportunity cost?
Oh, yeah.
So let's say that your hourly rate, and advisors, their hourlies tend to be a lot higher.
Of course.
But now, what if I could spend those 6 hours? It's going to cost me $300 at $50 an hour. But now I can spend those 6 hours finding a new client, doing high value activity. Well, now you start to really kind of multiply. And that's what I would say is a big difference. And people have heard me say this because I've said it on this podcast. I've said it in other venues, is that I've seen that wealth advisors view technology as an investment, right? That can help them scale, be more productive, be more profitable. Mm-hmm. I see retirement advisors view technology or marketing services or business development campaign services, whatever. Mm-hmm. They view it as an expense. And I think part of that is conditioned by there's a lot of fee compression in the 401k industry. And I think, and clients are demanding more. Yep. And advisors feel like, oh, we got to do more. And even just to kind of, it's very much like a negative sum, zero sum mindset. Like, if I'm going to lose this client if I don't. And so this idea of I can't really spend more money, but they're spending it in time, in effort, in frustration. Totally. To your point, it's totally. And so we have probably similar ways we try to position this is look, there's both how much time can we get you back, but then there's the value that you can take. If you get that time back, you may just say, I'm running my RPMs at 7,000 or 8,000 and I'm working a ton. And you know what? I don't need to grow my business, but I need some more margin in my life. Well, maybe that's then worth paying somebody so you don't have to do it. Or it could be hey, I'm so busy, I can't do business development. I can't prospect. I don't have time. I don't have bandwidth.
Right. Then
you should spend and invest, get time back, and then you actually got to follow through on what you said. You got to actually then say, hey, if I got 6 hours back, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to use that I'm not just going to find other stuff to do that, keeps me busy. I'm going to use that time to go try to grow.
Love it. And so with our firm, just as a plug, on our membership side, we spend the hours and hours and hours researching the personas for plan decision makers, for participants, what is top of mind for them. And then we write design physically with that, color scheme, etc., to make sure that it is visually appealing, interesting, someone wants to actually consume that content. We go through and meticulously look through email, subject lines, because you want to make sure if you are going to send out those emails that you're going to get the click rates. So that way people are looking at your stuff at the top of the inboxes. We make sure from an SEO perspective that our clients are appearing first on Google every time. So when someone in your location is saying retirement plan advisor, what was their name again? You're there. You're there. You're the one they're going to click on. And then when they click on your website, immediately it's that experience, that client experience. And we're putting our best foot forward. We're extending our hand with confidence.
Yeah. Well, and you just hit on one other thing too, is just because you can do something yourself doesn't mean you should. And I guarantee you they could spend 6 hours creating their own marketing designs and all of that. And I'm going to be willing to bet, knowing and seeing your stuff before, like, it's not going to be anywhere near as good as what you've created. It's kind of like you could go to a company and be like, hey, you could run your own 401k plan, you run your own committee and having it like, or we can come in and do 80 or 90% of the heavy lifting for you. And we're going to give you expertise and insights because this is what we do. Exactly. It's like, the cobbler's kid has no shoes. But you do great work, and you haven't, anybody listening to this, like, I would absolutely call Rebecca and her team and have a conversation just to find out where you can get more lift. I will tell you in your business, and I would tell you, I think you're going to get multiple returns on your investment by hiring a specialist, an expert that's good and has great work and has expertise and sees what all the other firms are doing and what's working, what's not working. So that's my plug for you, Rebecca, is that anybody listening to this should reach out and have a conversation, and we'll put in the show notes kind of a link to your site. And I know you have like different, one of the nice things is, it seems like you have different levels of engagement with your firm, everything from kind of a, basic to higher level tiers to really even custom bespoke, where you're kind of more like a fractional or outsourced, more kind of, customized to firms. Is that a fair way to kind of describe it, and anywhere in between?
Yeah, we have a range of opportunities for clients, including fractional CMO work as well.
Right. So, well, this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it as always. Appreciate what you do in the industry, and congratulations on 10 years. And you've built something that's really, really cool, and you do great work. And I know of a ton of firms that work with you. So good for them and good for you. And thanks for being a guest.
Thanks so much for having me. And also, I'll plug your firm as well. So when advisors are thinking about tech stacks and you come to those points of, how can I make this faster, better, smarter, consider Fiduciary RX.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.